Hi, this is Paul. You probably noticed I haven't made a homeroom video, at least a fresh one, for a few days. It's partly because I didn't really want to sit and just talk sort of unfiltered in front of the camera. I hardly knew who Charlie Kirk was. I knew that he was a conservative um, activist, political activist for Turning Point USA. I knew he was young, but that was about all I knew about him. I knew that I think I'd seen a little bit of that Jubilee, that one versus something. I think I'd seen like 4 or 5 minutes of him doing that, and was quite impressed at um, how engaged and I thought respectful he seemed to treat the people in front of him really well. Now he had his own ideas about right and wrong, and he pressed them. But I didn't get the sense that he was dismissive or condescending or mocking against the people that he sat across the table with. Ezra Klein clearly knew him better. And again, Ezra Klein seemed to be on the other team. And I read his opinion piece and was really very impressed. And I also heard the Ross Douthat piece that he made. I think the initial shock that I had was, to some degree, a rehearsal of my memories of the 70s, of the kind of political violence. I was trying to communicate that to my children, and I'd never heard of any of this, they'd say. And I'd say, have you ever heard of Patty Hearst? And then a light would go on. Oh, yeah, Patty Hearst. And there's a crazy still, we remember in all these images, the still of her being in a bank with a gun. And I remember when that all came down. I was a little bit older when that happened. I was born in '63, so I was a little bit older by then, and old enough to watch the adults in my life sort of looking around and listen to the talking heads on the television set, trying to make sense of this. And I think what I really felt immediately for was his wife and children, because my goodness, I've read some things on Substack. This picture just breaks my heart. Um, this piece on Substack talks about. Well, let me find it. I found myself becoming more emotional at the images of him holding his wife and children, or the videos of him fathering his daughter, and the vulgar spectacle of him being shot in the neck. Everyone is somebody's baby, and Charlie was also a husband and a dad. And, today when I heard the story of the killer, or at least the alleged killer at this point, because it's also true that within 48 hours, even a week or two, things will continue to change. I mean, again, to go back to the Patty Hearst thing, there was all of this sense making, trying to get a sense of what happened to Patty Hearst. And there'll be lots. There'll be a whirlwind going on around this thing. The only time it's remotely okay to kill someone is when they're trying to kill you and there's no other choice. Charlie Kirk wasn't trying to kill anybody. I can't imagine that his children's experience of this nation will be growing up, knowing their dad was killed in front of them and that parts of the country cheered that it happened. Whether or not those kids view their father's death as a tragedy restricted to a certain period of time or an ever-present madness lurking at the heart of the country will tell us whether or not we have succeeded or failing as people. Then he tells this story of Kurt Cobain made the world famous decision to kill himself over 30 years ago when I was in second grade. I remember this vividly because his much younger stepsister was my classmate. She stayed home from school that day but something like a dozen news crews circled outside the building, hoping to get a shot of her entering or leaving. All of us kids got our pictures taken by eager photographers in case we happened to be the one. That's probably what Kurt's mother was trying to spare his sister from. And she stayed home from school for a few months until the story cooled off. Kurt's death shook the whole town, and it's still a decently popular topic of conversation. Do people visit? Do people look? Do they want to see the home he grew up in? Sure they do. Later, when my brother became a paper boy to Kurt's grandfather, I saw what that kind of world-famous grief had done up close. I always accompanied my brother on collection days so he wouldn't get robbed. And Leland would always try to pull us inside and give us Polaroids of Kurt as a baby. We never accepted, which I think was a sort of test. But before he paid his bills, Leland would rant for however long we stayed that Courtney had been the one ultimately responsible. He wanted both of us to know, as grade school children, that Kurt would never have killed himself. Never. Courtney killed Kurt. He knew. He wanted to make sure we knew. My brother was his paper boy for years, and this was more or less every interaction. I don't know that Leland ever really had a waking moment after Kurt's death where he wasn't thinking about his grandson. This was the ugliest intrusion into what has become one of the most private pains I have ever witnessed. It's one thing to lose someone you've loved. It's another to have your tragedy be a global news juggernaut that extracts your private grief into public spectacle. So you have to constantly explain to strangers to satisfy their curiosity. Another piece I read talked about Jedi brain. I don't like the term. I still haven't adequately come up with a term I like for this dynamic, but he talks about the dynamic fairly well. Jedi brain is a term I've often heard Disney brain, Marvel brain, and the like, for a mental state wherein people's main frame of reference for understanding politics, war, and the interrelationship between them is mass media entertainment products. There are good guys and bad guys, each occupying a respective political identity, and it's the job of the former to seek a more just order by destroying the latter. Narrative coherence tends towards the personification of each side in a small group of heroes on the one hand and a big villain on the other. This latter figure is the wellspring of Team Evil's grand scheme. If he is destroyed, so goes with him all the bad stuff he represents. This particular article is talking about the Russian-Ukraine war, but I think about all that something like this entails. One of the things when I was doing the live stream today I was thinking about was when someone is killed like this, there's a dynamic that gets encountered. Some of what I've heard from some people is, okay, I don't like the political violence, but why do people have to say he was such a good guy? And I think, you don't know how this works? Did you see what happened to George Floyd? We make people into the saints we need them to be, or the Satans, depending on the role we want them to play to make sense of our world, to maintain our plausibility structures. That's what we do. And this poor man is now subject to this. So I will likely, and just as a result of his assassination, I now know more about him, whereas I never paid much attention to him before. And I thought it was very big of Ezra Klein and daring to do what he did. And I applaud him for it. Because I assume he spoke the truth, even though it was hard. And from what I could read, at least from Ezra Klein, I have to agree with him. He seemed to be doing it the right way. And this is built on, again, the tiniest little impression I had of him in that one Jubilee video where, was it a Jubilee video? I don't know. But again, it was these little interchanges because these YouTube shorts come at me unbidden so often. And even if your mouth just sort of glances over it, on they go. But again, he always seemed to treat even the people with whom he had big disagreements with respect. And I was impressed by that. That's a lot of what impressed me from early Jordan Peterson days when he was talking to students. He treated the people with whom he disagreed with respect. He treated them like people. I didn't know some of the stuff I learned since then about the growth of Turning Point USA. Clearly was extraordinarily skilled, bright, charismatic. But again, I just cannot stop thinking about his family and what they have lost. And not only what they have lost, what they will just have to continue to suffer because of the way he died. Dawn gave a great talk today, and I want to talk a little bit about some of what she said.
So I'm just hearing another little thread. It's kind of coming a little bit from Ramfi's vertical, horizontal, and the shallowness of horizontal when the vertical is not shared. And then a little bit related to Rick, free speech, and how quickly it can be confusing, the difference between free speech and violence, as if that isn't perfectly clear. You can get to the point where it is confusing. And then back to what I had pointed to before with Jason about the shift. And I saw his dichotomy between therapeutic and, did you say religious or just moral? But I think it's kind of this based on the same kind of things. Okay. Maybe distinction between interacting or living through the therapeutic model as versus the religious or ethical model. And so with all those things, it just seems to me like underneath all of that, and it was really helpful to me to just open up a little bit more of my understanding of what I see around me. Meaning to say, as Ranfi said, we bring our suppositions and just being awakened to the suppositions. So going right back to enlightenment separation of the religious and the public sphere, supposedly. Religion becomes a private matter, and then that long, slow road to religion being just your set of beliefs and my set of beliefs, and now it's all chaotic because there is no shared set of beliefs and worldview, especially as we see Christianity in decline in the West. So, Ranfi, you're talking about those shared values. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking as we lose those shared values that came, let's just say, from religion in our culture, right? As we lose those and things break apart, we are defaulting into that, what we heard about already, that radical individualism. My opinion's as good as your opinion, your truth, my truth. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what accounts for this massive growth of therapy, right? Where it is all radically individual. It is all radically self-actualization. My therapist is here to help me realize my potential and my, what I can be, my actuality. And there's no one, and again, breakdown of families and the dissolution of families as we spread out across the continent, from our extended families. So now our entire moral structure is based on the therapy model rather than the religious ethical model. And I'm sure you all know that, realize as well. So rather than saying, and we hear it all the time, That is bad. You cannot say that is good and that is bad. You have to say that's crazy or that's sick. When we talk about Hitler, we don't say he was evil, although evil has now just become to mean this. We don't say he was bad. We say he was really sick. So the word sick has replaced the word evil. We're not allowed to use religious terms because it's so anti Christian right now in our general population, and openly so. But we can be just as morally outraged by someone who shows some psychological deviance that's not in our new list of fruit of the spirit. Our new
And I thought that was such an important point because when there's a school shooting, when there's an assassination, we always want to say this person is a crazy person. And I often tell people, I spend a fair amount of time around people who have mental illness. And it is certainly the case that people with certain kinds of mental illness will do very destructive things. Sometimes that scale, often just to themselves and the ones around them and those they love. But, while I see this Jedi brain, I think about the way that spirits are possessing us. Because we have, again, this gate, and suddenly we have to fit everything into this worldview. And these worldviews come with heroes and villains and saints and satans. And so I was thinking about, of course, now suddenly I see people pushing back on the word martyr, as if the word martyr hasn't long been used. So, well, you can't use that word because this person hasn't died in a Roman Colosseum. So, come on, this word has been stretched plenty, and usually what it means is that someone has given their life, often involuntarily, for a cause. One of the realities of an assassination is that for this person, their timeline stops in an important way, and that can be significant. It's often said Martin Luther King Jr. was getting increasingly vocal. He had sort of fallen from the national awareness and zeitgeist from, let's say, the peak of 1963. He was more and more concerned about the Vietnam War. In many ways, a lot of the legal work of the civil rights movement, so much of that had been done. Some of what happens in the civil rights movement in the 70s then is the movement sort of looks for its next thing. And again, while Vietnam sort of has a valence in our collective imaginary, and again, so many of us just have these very low resolution, binary, Vietnam War, well, what did that mean? Well, that was a bad war. And World War II, that was a good war. And Korea, was there a Korean War? I don't know. Which is why, of course, when they did MASH, they set it in the Korean War, not the Vietnam War, because they wanted to play around with some things. Of course, since King's death, there's, at some point, the FBI recordings of, some of the sexual stuff that they recorded, those will be released. Oh, I am not looking forward to those days. especially now with the internet. And so, again, and people find it enormously offensive if I would say, well, if George Floyd, if George Floyd's life hadn't ended on that street that day in that way, would he have been known? How would he have been seen? And of course, when all that news happened, there was all contestations about his criminal record and how he treated women and on and on and on and on and on. So, is he a martyr? Is he a saint? Not too long ago, a Substack went through about Seraphin Rose, and to me, it just looked like a hit job. But I didn't know. Someone whose opinion I respect, when Rod Dreher and Paul Kingsnorth were writing pieces basically lauding Seraphin Rose, said to me, I don't know if they should do that. Because there are some sides to that story that are sort of unresolved. And there's a reason he hasn't been canonized by certain groups. And I thought of canonization and what it means and how canonization functions within an arena. And then somebody else on Substack writes this piece where basically says, yeah, most of the stuff in that other piece, some of it was true, some of it was bogus, looks like a hit job. And then this person goes into actually a lot of the same stuff that we treated with Laura and Sam on our sex positivity church fathers conversation that we had. And so, what's the truth of this man's story? And I feel no need to investigate it one way or the other. God is his judge, and if even after he took vows or started a new life, even if he stumbled and was tempted, I think that's between him and his confessor, and I'm not his judge. I was thinking about the irony that the person that took Charlie Kirk's life, sort of in an Obi-Wan way, made Charlie Kirk far more powerful than he ever had been before. Now, some people said, he could very well have become president someday, and that could be. I mean, he was a remarkable young man from the accounts that I've read. Even though other people, again, because of this Jedi mind, well, there's this line, and again, they're gonna play. We're gonna play with these characters on the screen just like we do with all the other characters on the screen, because all they are characters on a screen, and they don't have real lives, and they don't have real families. I was watching this documentary of Billy Joel, and actually his life was beginning to. His father with his grandparents had to flee Europe because of the Nazis. They were wealthy in Europe. They had to get out. His father seemed to be a very haunted man who could not function as a good father for Billy. Seemed to function as a better father for Billy's stepbrother that late in life Billy found out he had. Billy Joel had his own demons to contend with, but it seemed that actually, with his wife as his manager and him in a certain place, things were going pretty well until they just went too well. And he became that big and the marriage couldn't handle it. And this was a marriage to a woman who had been the wife of his best friend, who he was living with, coming up. I mean, it's just human life. And these are, I can tell these stories because these are famous stories. And when you're famous, as the Kurt Cobain story noted, it's your father no longer belongs to you, he belongs to the world. And his death is no longer a tragic family story that you have to overcome. Now suddenly it's everybody around you will remember it. Maybe. There's these cycles jump in repeatable ways, and now suddenly everyone wonders what will come of this. I don't know. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was one of those dominoes that started the First World War, which started the Second World War. And so, can terrible things come of it come as a result of an assassination? You bet they can. I think in some ways, of course, this was sort of on top of the story of that young Ukrainian woman who was murdered on the subway in front of a camera. And the cameras, as Grim Grizz was trying to point to during the live cast, cameras are such a part of this. They're such a part of this. They're such a part of this Jedi brain. And when I think about, okay, why am I anxious about this? Am I just anxious for myself because I don't want to see the world descend into madness and chaos, and I don't want to see the cycle of political violence go? In processing this with some people, I always have to remind them that sort of the liberal democratic bargain is that the state has a monopoly on violence. But part of the, I think, genius of the American system is the state has a monopoly on violence, but the American founding fathers created a system to try to restrain the government. Because when the state has a monopoly on violence, well, you know what monopolies do. And so we need the government to use violence or the threat of violence, the threat of incarceration, to keep order. But can the government do so with enough justice that it maintains credibility? Credibility in the eyes of a Jedi-brained public that is just watching it with popcorn, and there's good guys and bad guys. Gosh, I hate that. Wish I could escape it. It was so interesting. Religion for Breakfast has a piece on fandoms. Oh, this was so interesting.
Pop culture fandom at its most intense. The communal empowerment of singing the fight song at a college football game, making a trip to Graceland to connect with Elvis Presley, getting married at Disney World. Are these religious behaviors? Can a person's fandom of a sports team, a corporate brand, a singer, or a cinematic universe be religious? Well, it all depends on how we define what religion is, or rather, what it does. See, I'm not a fan of the simplistic matching game you sometimes see online. Wokeism is a religion, environmentalism is a religion, here are 10 reasons why. These arguments usually flatten both religion and the thing being compared, turning them into a checklist of surface-level similarities. But at the same time, I'm the same guy who published videos saying that baseball players engage in magical rituals, Silicon Valley tech companies can be religious, and the American flag can be a religious symbol. So what gives? Am I being a hypocrite? What I'm getting at is the classic distinction in religious studies between an essentialist definition of religion and a functionalist definition of religion.
And just spoiler alert, I don't think he pulls it off in the video, because if there's anything religious, it's the political. Religion is dollars and politics is cents. Religion is always and politics is now. And so surely a scholar of religion knows of religious studies. So this pulling back of trying to look at it from the heights of a monarchical vision to try to look at it objectively, essentialist. It's like, really? Does that work? I see it much more along the lines that Dawn does, and I see the hypocrisies in this. That was this young man who killed him crazy? I don't know. We'll learn a lot more about him. Doesn't sound like it. Not crazy in the way that I see a lot of crazy people muttering to themselves next to shopping carts in the rain. Was he possessed by a spirit? What at least most of the little news clippets have said. He's turned in, it seems at this point, again, all these things may change, seems like he's turned in by his father, who spoke with his youth pastor, who's also some kind of a marshal. So he goes to church. And I think that young man has ruined the lives of so many people, including his own. And I think of the courage of his father asking his son to turn himself in. And it is just all so tragic. It is so tragic. I find no Jedi brain in watching this on screens. I think, as Chad noted the other day, the spiritual frame is the right frame. And for me, relief from the powers and principalities is what we need. Maybe I'll put this in no wait, no ads and see if I ever fully release it. I don't know. I feel absolutely incapable of talking about it. Because what do I know? It's just such a tragedy. And that this happens in front of an entire courtyard full of college students who now have to live with this too. And why do I make a video where I share this with you? I mean, I knew right away it's going to be just video after video about the response. I was watching Lionheart and Jordan Daniel Wood in preparation for Southeastuary. Lionheart had gotten the text about the killing while they were recording, and it leads to this section in the middle.
Yeah, which is very possible. But I kind of like just got like an inspiration to ask, like, do you guys think we can do anything about this? And they're like, no. Do you think we should try to do anything about it? So many words. What? And it's like that's one issue that we're facing, and it is, and it is true that for them, that's all they've known. Like someone just said yesterday in my class, like, look, we've always been at war since I've been born. Like, there's always been violence. It's just sort of like what we do as a country. And so I think despair. I mean, I think it was wise of the Desert Fathers to list despair as the one of the most dangerous vices. They do that very constantly, like very oddly. You might think it's lust, or you might think it's even greed, anger. They often target as one of the worst, but actually despair comes in as one of the most severe very often, and it's because it's a sort of willful giving in to the sense that what is presented to you is the true world. Like all this violence is really actually that is the logic of creation. That's the heart of things. All these lies, that's the heart of things. And as soon as you start to think, maybe it is. Why should I do anything? And that's despair.
Why wouldn't a phenomenology of violence be hiding an ontology of violence, right? Like
Exactly.
what?
Right.
Yeah. No, and I think that that's very interesting. And I think there's faith in the fact not that like, yeah, I can make a difference. Yeah, and like it's just keeping going, not having any idea how you would make a difference. And even if it's going to make a difference, like Jeremiah continuing to preach, even though nothing, like it's all still, you just need to keep doing what you're supposed to do. And if that, you don't know what the big picture is or isn't, or if that will mean anything, you just need to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it really hard to fight a battle that I don't know I'm going to be able to win within my lifetime.
Right.
Because I think, and what that hides is the fact that most of the battles I fight are for my own glory and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what I want to be the one leading the flag over the thing. And,
Right.
and if I can't do that, I'm going to have to draw on some other resource that I haven't cultivated as much as, I don't know. Yeah.
And it does sort of bring to the fore. I mean, look here it is. It's like I just had a class today on Gregory of Nyssa's claim that the incarnation was the greatest display of God's power, because he did there what no one thought God could do, which is become weak. And there just is. This is the thing that keeps me Christian at the end of the day, if I'm being honest. Like, it's not. There's a lot of reasons not to be.
It's not the evidence for the historical Jesus. It's not the ontological argument, right?
Okay. Now that you're mentioning them,
I really like the ontological argument, frankly, but continue.
yeah, it's like, I mean, look, I mean, you and I both know that can have its place for sure, but like, no, that's not the thing. I mean, in the face of this kind of stuff, right? That's not the thing. No, it isn't. It isn't that I can reason anything. What it is that, like, in Christianity, I mean, I was showing my students this morning, that early graffiti of Alexamenos worships as God, and it's like Jesus is depicted as a jackass.
The donkey, yeah.
Yeah. And then we talked about 1 Corinthians, and we talked about Gregory, and it's just this sort of aesthetic. I can't keep my eyes off of it. It's this thing of like, what it's like Christianity does acknowledge that the heart of this world is violence. That's why God is crucified.
Yeah.
At the same time, he tramples down death by death. And so he acknowledges the heart of this false world as violence, even as he's exactly in the same instant revealing this world as false, which is to say, bringing to birth the true. And how that looks
maybe it's a good note on which to end. So I don't know if I will post this to the whole channel. Maybe I'll wait and see what the no ads, no wait people think of this video, because the world doesn't need to watch me process this stuff. What I think about this doesn't matter, because again, the truth is, what do I know about this? So little. So little. But at the same time, what I do know about this world and what I believe about its Redeemer, I think is worth talking about. So leave a comment.